Welcome to Sports CTO Talks. In this series, we would be connecting with industry leaders from sports and technology, where we will simplify sports for you. I am Ami, your guide on this journey through amazing minds of sports tech leaders who are shaping the future of sports. We will dive deep into discussions and innovations driving the industry, from AI to cloud, from cybersecurity to sustainability. If it is sports tech, we are talking about it. On today's episode, we have an interesting guest with us. We have 𝗵𝗱𝗻𝗄𝘀, the founder and managing director of Berlin Growth Advisory. We welcome you, Ibrahim, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ami.
Absolutely. BGA is a consultancy helping sports institutions, investors, and right holders drive commercial growth and maximize brand value. With a deep background in marketing technology, he combines data-led strategy with deep industry storytelling to turn insights into measurable impact. Beyond consultancy, Ibrahim also hosts the Football Economy podcast, exploring the business behind football through conversations on club strategies, revenue models, and sports tech innovations. He also founded the Football Economy Network, a free, curated community helping graduates and early career professionals break into the sports industry, built on the belief that access in this industry is uneven and those who have it make it easier for the next generation. And in today's podcast, he would be talking about who really drives the growth in sports, the triangle which is there, the power of institutions, investors, and the right holders. So, Ibrahim, I will directly jump on to my first question for you. So, how do you define the power triangle? Like the sports institutions, the investors, the right holders, and how do you see the balance of power between them? And has that evolved over the years?
Okay. First of all, to define the power triangle, we have to define each of these entities that belong in the triangle. So I guess at the top of the triangle, we're talking about the institutions. So institutions meaning the clubs, the communities that function as a club, that would fall under the institutions. When we talk about the right holders, we're talking about the broadcasters, people who own IPs, people who are able to license those IPs. Those would fall under the broadcasters. And then the third would be obviously we've spoken about institutions, licensed broadcasters, and the third would be the investors. So the investors would basically be your private equity firms, your institutional capital, sovereign wealth funds. Those would form the three parts of the triangle. And in terms of how those elements or entities have evolved over time, you have to look at where capital has moved in that time period and where power has moved in that time period. So from an institution perspective, obviously a lot of interest has come into sports as a result of let's call it the informational age, as a result of viewing patterns, as a result of internet consumption habits. But clubs historically have been seen as community assets. The badge has been where, like for instance in football, the badge has been with the color of the badge, so the logo, the badge has been the symbol of a club. For investors are looking at where can we look at potential returns on investments in terms of capital. And for right holders, they're looking at where can we distribute the content and get the most bang for our buck, to get the most return on investment, increase our retention rates when it comes to the fan relationship. So in terms of framing it as a triangle, it's very useful because what I would say is that triangle is unstable. Unstable meaning it's not balanced. So the power dynamics has changed from where historically the institutions have been the power center. It's now, in my opinion, has transferred to the right holders. People who own the IP who have licensed the IP. So originally the IP is owned by the institutions, but the right holders have now obviously licensed that. But because they have created platforms and integrated ecosystems for them to have a direct relationship with the fans. It's made it easier for them to sort of like understand the value of each fan, and over time being able to create commercial deals that allows them to have the right sort of like structure that gives them time to incur that value over time using those personalized insights that they've gathered as a result of that structure that they've created. So in a nutshell, the triangle is not balanced. The balance of power has shifted towards right holders. They've accumulated the most leverage. For example, I'll give you an example. So Apple signed the MLS deal in 2022. They were not signing a broadcasting rights. They were signing a deal that allowed them to try out how to basically create a product that allows them to have direct line or passage of line to the consumers. And that way, obviously, it feeds them information on who can eventually be retained on Apple's services. So that shows you that the structural power dynamic has shifted towards the right holders.
Okay. So when you're talking about this, like I have seen sports institutions historically, prioritize competitions and community as a whole. So what mindset and structural shift are required for them to operate on commercial levels today?
Right. It's a good question. So I think most sports institutions are currently running 21st century revenue ambitions on 20th century governance structures. And then, they tend to then sort of like try to understand why doesn't it add up. The reason why it doesn't add up is like when you look at the triangle again, the institutions are actually the most sort of like conflicted actor. They carry like a dual mandate. They have to protect the assets, which is the sport integrity, the community integrity on one side, and then they also have to generate commercial returns on the other side. So that balance of maintaining order when it comes to the clubs that have to maintain the ability to commercialize their assets, but at the same time cannot sort of like destroy the sport integrity. Keeping those two mandates is very difficult. So they eventually bleed into each other. So what I would say is that the mindset shift that needs to happen is that you have to mentally shift from a custodian to a platform operator. So for example, Real Madrid, the club, they were able to think so like decades down the line when it came to the renovation of the Bernabeu. So they looked at it as, okay, we want to compete with other big clubs in Europe, and we don't want to get left behind because we are a community club. We're not private equity driven. We are not backed by a state backer. We're a community club. So to be able to compete on an even playing field, well, not even playing field, to be able to compete with these well-capitalized entities or institutions, we have to find a different way of generating revenue. And the way they did it was by renovating the Bernabeu, the stadium. So just call it the stadium upgrade, where they were basically able to deliberately position the club as a global entertainment platform that just happens to play football. So now they're able to generate revenue 365 days a year across concerts, even corporate events, and then premium hospitality. So they've shifted from a custodian approach to a platform thinking. So similar to the right holders, Real Madrid have been able to now use that community asset, turn it into a revenue generator throughout the year. And another example would be Tottenham Spurs. Tottenham Spurs. Obviously, right now we're speaking, they're in a very bad situation. They might be relegated, they might not be. But under their former chairman, who was also the CEO before he moved up to become the executive chairman, Daniel Levy, he also looked long term, took on debt, and then created a very modern, some would say the best stadium in England. And now they're able to use that stadium as a revenue generator outside of just football, where there are go-karts and events that happen, concerts that happen, even NFL games that happen. So that's sort of the mindset shift that needs to take place.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's bleeding. So I think for what I would say is the most private equity firms are basically, when they come into football or sports in general, they think they're buying like a cash flow business. with a scarcity premium. Obviously, scarcity meaning that there are only so many sort of like football clubs, so many leagues in sports in general. But then they forget that they're actually buying into like long-term social contracts, but they discover this the hard way. So when you consider the triangle that I mentioned, where at the top of the tip of the triangle, you have the institutions, the two baselines, you have the right holders on the left, on the right, you have the investors. The investors, they are the newest to this sort of like triangle in terms of like the nature of which they come into the ecosystem. So for the last, let's call it 10 to 15 years, they've been considered a disruptive force, for better or for worse. In most cases, for better. So investors look at opportunities from asymmetric lens, cap your downside and have unlimited upside. But when it comes to football, you're looking at a situation whereby it's still a community-driven asset, right? Although, like I said, there are limited clubs at the top league. So in Premier League, the 20 Premier League clubs, there's only one Champions League, only one Super Bowl. If you want to talk about the American sort of like American sports community tournaments, but the supply is still constrained, right? It's durable, and it can potentially justify its evaluation, relative to the comparable entertainment assets that you see online. So my point here would be that investors consistently underestimate the fact that sports still has like an emotional aspect to it. So as much as we say it's a sporting economy or football economy, it's still an emotional economy. It's emotional driven, emotionally charged. For example, red-blooded Capital, although they are very sophisticated investors, when they walked into AC Milan, they could see that the Tifosi culture was different to the culture that they have seen in different sort of like regions. So compared to the American region, it's completely different. Italian football politics is completely different to American sports politics or culture. There's also the UEFA financial regulations, that is completely different to how things are done in the American market. Another example is 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝘀. A lot of Chelsea fans that will listen to this will know that when he came in, he showed a lot of like investors how not to sort of like have like an onboarding period where he was having open discussions about his plan for the club, and also the fact that they injected over 600 million pounds into player acquisitions. It all looked like a different strategy to what has been done before. And it comes as it results that way because investors are not aligned with the way a football club is governed. So an investor's clock is obviously short-term driven, but a football community club, their clock is long-term driven. Those two things are not aligned. That's where you get complexities that arise. So I would say that's the issue, the regulatory complexity, but also the social contract complexity. There's also the MCO thing, where there's obviously multi-club ownership structures. That's becoming a thing, although Liverpool's owners decided not to venture into it recently, so we're not sure if that's going to be going down a downward spiral. But these are sort of like regulatory hurdles are the reasons why you see a mismatch between investors and sports entities.
Okay. And when we talk, when we talk, there are right holders controlling some of the most valuable assets there are sports media rights, the fan data, and the intellectual property. So how are these assets reshaping in today's time when there is AI driven distribution, or there is a rise of direct fan, direct to fan models, when it is there, how it is reshaping?
Mm. I think I would say, first of all, that we are at the end of the broadcasting era in sports. I think this is the first statement. Clubs and right holders who don't build direct fan relationships in the next 5 years, they will be renting their own audience from technological platforms in the next
Okay.
10, 15 years. So that's a strong statement, but that's a statement that if you look at the patterns, the trends that have been going on in sports, it's consistent. Now, through the triangle, sort of like mental model or prism that I painted, you can see the power dynamics also here are very, very different. So for the last 30 years, the model for sports was institutions produce sports. So institutions meaning football leagues, football clubs, or in this case, football leagues, they produce the sports. The right holders, they then distribute it, and then investors, they back any sort of like play, any sort of like let's call it project. So the gap that needs to be bridged is for the broadcasters, the fans to be connected. Between the sports itself and the fans, there needs to be like a bridging of the gap. But right now, you can see that that gap is not as close as it could be. Where I'm seeing changes is the technological platforms actually bridge that gap through personalized content distributions, through let's call it docu-series. Like for instance, I think the first one that comes to my mind is Formula One. Is a very good sort of like case study where Liberty Media, they took over the assets in 2017, and then they were able to then focus on a strategy where they documented the players through their journey, through the tournaments, through the competitions in Drive to Survive. Then this opened like access to the paddock, opened like a different sort of like generation of fans using the direct to fan strategy. This is completely different to what other sports have done, but also obviously football has started to do this itself. So I think this is one way. In terms of like AI driven personalized content, I think we're seeing more and more that the next phase of football commentary would be whereby you see individual fan cultures would have their own personalized AI commentary, so in their language, localized for them. So maybe I'm expecting the platform holders to do this. When I mean platform holders, I'm talking about the right holders, so Amazon, Dazan. I'm expecting them to inject a lot of like capital or investment into having this sort of like product or feature. So whereby each fan can have like a localized sort of like commentary in their language, with their tidbits of like a style of speaking, and that will give them a different sort of like experience when it comes to viewing the sport that they love.
Correct. So when in today's time, fan data and digital platforms are becoming a central thing for decision making in sports basically. So how can organizations build a right data infrastructure to turn fan engagement into measurable commercial outcomes?
So I think like the first thing I would say is that sports organizations obviously have a fan data problem. That's
Correct.
number one. The technology that's there, there's a lot of technology. The hard part is knowing what technology to integrate into your ecosystem. And then the other thing I would say is if you look at it through that triangle that I mentioned, they are competing interests. So if I'm a club, it's in my best interest to keep my data and to understand the data that I hold, to sort of like have like a very strong understanding of the fans that I hold within that data, and then to cultivate sort of like a relationship with those fans and create value for the fans, and then in turn incur commercial return based off the ecosystem or platform that I build. For right holders, their job is to distribute, is to get hold of that relationship and distribute so like the value between the broadcasting and IP towards the fans, and then return some part of the share of the value to the right holders. So it's in their interest to own that relationship as opposed to I'll give that relationship to the right holders. So now you see competing interests. For the investors, they're just looking for best, ROI, best return on investment. So investors will back whatever they think has the best potential for upside returns. So to sort of like solve this issue, you want to have a unified fan identity layer where for the right holders, first of all, I'll say that you need to shift away from the mindset of there's a specific amount of there's a specific pie, and the pie does not increase. Like there's a constraint on the ability for the pie to increase. That's one mentality that I think I've seen that the sports industry has a problem with, specifically to do with football. There's a problem sort of like seen around that, hey, we can actually grow the pie as opposed to having like, moving away from a fixed mindset and going into an abundance mindset. That's one issue I've seen that's prevalent in the sport industry. And to solve this, you want to give the opportunity to institutions to have the ability to build a coherent relationship with their fan base. But at the same time, when it comes to doubling down on infrastructure build, they can partner with the right holders to build that. So for instance, if I'm a right holder, I have an IP distributor, and I have the sort of like efficiency, know-how, the capability to actually build the infrastructure layer for a club to understand how to build a relationship with their fan base. I can build that and take a cut of all of that sort of relationship. But while at the same time the club itself have a personalized route to the fund. So both sides are winning there. For the investors, where they come in is that they're able to then fund both sides. The investors are well capitalized. They can inject capital into where they think a good return on investment will be. So yeah.
Correct. And there are sports organizations, they also talk about brand value. But there are very few who translate it into consistent revenue. So what are the most effective mechanisms for turning brand equity into sustainable growth?
Yeah. So I would say first of all that most clubs confuse having international followers with having sort of like international revenue. So they're not the same thing. So one is like a vanity metric, the other is like a commercial infrastructure problem that very few people are trying to solve. So through that triangle, you have the international so like monetization that is there, that is exposed, but there's a misalignment around that. Institutions that are able to think about their fan base as a global fan base will be able to win in the future. For right holders, so the broadcasters, the streaming platforms, they are already doing this. So I think the issue is around making sure that the institutions have the ability to actually connect the dots. Creates like a stronger pathway between the fans that they have sort of like exposure to and the relationship that they cultivate with those fans. So, for example, I would say that I was watching a documentary not too long ago about Liverpool fans in Japan. They wake up in the early morning, so I think 2 a.m., 3 a.m. to watch Liverpool matches. Now, if Liverpool were smart, they would actively push out different fan cultures in different parts of Japan, but also different parts of East Asia, and then have like let's call it a manager for each of those fan groups, designated manager for each of those fan groups. Maybe you incentivize the managers with, I don't know, like first class tickets to the club or VIP tickets. There has to be some commercial incentive for them to do the job. They don't have to be on the books officially for the club. So the point here is that you want to have mini community groups that the club can then attribute themselves to, and have like a relationship that they can build with those mini community groups. Another sort of like opportunity that I think MCO offers is that what City Football Group have done, where they have the multi-club model. They have Man City, New York City, Mumbai City. No, I think Mumbai City they pulled out of. Yokohama, they have that. So where they're able to penetrate different subcultures through the subsidiaries that they hold under this MCO model. So that's something that you can potentially use as a way to venture into having a relationship with different fans around the world. But what I would say is that not confusing having, like, for instance, Manchester United said they have 1 billion fans. Well, that's grounded on what facts? Like, how did they come to that number? Is it 1 billion people that have engaged on social media? Is it 1 billion people that have the ability to buy a commercial assets, so commercial merchandise or products? How are they evaluated? How are they? How do you measure this 1 billion fans? So what I would say is that you want to have tangible ways of measuring the fan base, and you do that by actually cultivating a relationship with the fans themselves. You don't have to always have like a commercial return on investment. It's just about having that engagement and being able to know that over time there's the ability to then structure like commercial relationship with those fans, but without having an organic, a very sustainable, very transparent relationship with the fans. There's no way to build a commercial relationship.
Okay. And when we are talking about the international fan base or the database, so that represents a large audience at the end of the day. So is that market untapped, or what is the scenario today as of now?
No, I mean, from what I've understood and from the research I've done, there's a huge untapped market for football clubs in general. Like, let's talk about the market that you're in India. Well, I mean, the place you're in India. So India represents like a big market for football. Yeah, everyone knows that cricket is the default sport in India, but there's a big football community in India. And what are football clubs doing to tap into that market? A lot of football clubs have tried, but they've used the wrong sort of like strategy. So a lot of football clubs have tried to, build academies there. They've tried to, take their players there for tours. But I think the right sort of like entry strategy is localizing the relationship, building together with communities already who have started sub communities in India, building a relationship with them, and then having them lead the strategy of how to create a more structured relationship that can be over time commercialized. Obviously, India obviously is a growing economy. It's one of the fastest economies in the world. People are moving from poverty to middle class very quickly. Um, but you cannot compare the purchasing power in India with the purchasing power in America. That's just a fact. So that has to be taken into consideration also. But regardless, I think, like I say, that's a big market. If football clubs were clever, they would focus on trying to partner with sub communities that are already doing great work for their club in India, and then building a strategy around that together with them, as opposed to imposing a strategy on them.
So when you're talking about partnerships, these days strategic partnerships are evolving beyond the traditional sponsorships. So how are collaborations with technology companies, media platforms, or sports tech companies or firms reshaping the commercial model into sports?
Yeah. So Howard, can you say that question again, please?
Sure, definitely. As you were saying, there are strategic partnerships, but they are evolving today beyond the traditional sponsorships. So, how are the collaborations with technology companies, media platforms, sports tech companies? They are reshaping the commercial model.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I would say for me, from what I've seen, is that you're seeing a lot of technological platforms taking more of like an operational interest and involvement in the clubs that they do partnerships with. So I think the first sort of like case study that comes to mind would be Real Madrid. You see that they've had a long-term partnerships with Microsoft, where Microsoft provides them with like I think CRM support, but other, let's call it, technological service support. So obviously they have a sponsorship with Microsoft, but at the same time, Microsoft is providing them with actual value. And this is the model I think we're going to see, or it's already being prevalent in the industry, but it's going to be even more so. It's not just about let's slap a logo or a brand rights on the club or the stadium. It's about how can we interchange value, how can we exchange value consistently and build that relationship over time. And you're going to see that compound. So on the other examples would be for instance, even a very, 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 small example that I don't think a club is. There's probably a club doing this, but like nutritional, like let's say like a protein snack, for instance. You want to have like a protein snack company as a sponsor for your club. Let's say you're a mid to low tier club. The collaboration should not end there. It should continue, whereby the players are obviously benefiting from the protein snack, but at the same time they're also providing the company with, let's call it, insights that can help them build the product better, from research in terms of like the intake, in terms of the impact to the body. So that's the sort of like I think the model that's going to be prevalent in the future, now and in the future. So where by any sort of like technological provider, service provider is impacting the actual value, as opposed to just naming rights and capital. So I think interchanging of value will be prevalent in the future, now and in the future.
Absolutely. So, from your experience into the advisory, where do you most frequently see untapped commercial opportunities within sports organizations, where institutions are leaving value on the table?
Yeah, I think the three biggest areas of untapped value in sport right now that are hiding in plain sight. Basically, like when you look at the intersection between the institutions, the investors, and the rights holders, is the idea that there's no sort of like clean line of ownership. So no one is taking responsibility in terms of like how to best improve the relationship between the fans and the sports itself, the sports entity itself. So, for instance, an example would be the idea that when you have a successful cohort of players that have built the club, like for instance, Manchester United is a good example. So Manchester United have had decades of success. Now, not so much, but they've had a long decade of success under Sir Alex Ferguson, and even before that, they had a cohort called '90, class of 90, is it 95, 96, and 7? 92, I think 92. One of them. Yeah, class of 92, I think. And so, you've seen that because of the relationship between the owners of the club, the board of the club, and the class of 92, there's been no potential collaborations that have happened, at least not to my understanding. Maybe now because Sir Jim Ratcliffe is now, minority shareholder, and I think he owns the football operation side of things. But the opportunity to build off the relationship between those successful graduates who have now become entrepreneurs on their own right, who have become very impactful, very powerful voices in football is missing. Like, for instance, David Beckham is a very big one. Why has Manchester United done a massive collaboration between David Beckham and the club? Why? Why hasn't Manchester United done massive collaboration between Gary Neville and the club in terms of just tapping into sort of like nostalgia? Everyone is driven by nostalgia. I read a report recently that said Gen Z are now going back into the 90s in terms of their consuming habits. They're disposing of subscriptions and they're going into stores and looking for CD-ROMs, looking for Walkmans, Discmans, watching shows from the past, trying to avoid the hyper need to be online all the time and be subscription based. So that's a trend clearly. So why haven't United tapped into that trend of nostalgia in terms of like building sort of like an audience around the successful past that they've had? That's one thing that's missing. Okay. The other thing I would say is women's sports. The idea that you can combine, some clubs do this very well. I think Arsenal does this very well. But the idea that you can combine men and women when it comes to commercial opportunities, so like mixed merchandise campaigns. So, for instance, if you have like you have like a new merchandise drop that you want to have a campaign about, there should be more women stars in the team mixed with men to push out that new clothing drop. So yeah, those are the things I would say.
Okay, so like if you were advising a sports organization undergoing transformation today, so what are the 3 strategies you prioritize, would you recommend to position them for a long-term growth in this evolving industry?
Yeah. So I would say that every transformation program that I've seen that's failed, the root cause is that it started with revenue model and then it forgot to build the foundation underneath it. So basically, strategy without infrastructure in that sense. What I would say is the first thing that needs to be done is you need to build the foundational layer, so the data layer. So before you build any revenue model, what does that mean? It means that you need to have the commercial know-how. So you have to have like the right commercial strategy that matters for let's call it, we're in 2025 now, so the next 5 years, to make sure that you know what the fans will be like the next 5 years, to make sure you know what the micro trends that are happening, not just in football and sports, but also in economy in general. You need to see what other sports are doing to future-proof their sports. That would be the first thing I would say. The second thing, you need to have the ability to build separate sort of like teams when it comes to the team that runs the governance of the sports, so the football operations, and the team that runs the commercial entity. But they also have to have the ability to be cross-pollinated, so the ability to collaborate efficiently. But you can't have one team superseding the other. It needs to be like let's call it a working relationship of equals or partners. A balance needs to be struck there. The commercial team cannot supersede the football operations team, and likewise for the football operations team. And then the third one I would say is you need to go away from the mentality of building products and building platforms. So think in platforms, not in products. So the most durable ability to have like commercial growth, I think in the future would be where institutions are able to build platforms around their fan base, around their community assets, and not give that up to let's call it right holders or service providers. Because if you don't own the relationship with the fan, you're renting the relationship with the fan, and that doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. One last question in this segment, Ibrahim. Looking forward, in the next decade, do you see the relationship between the triangle, like the institutions, the investors, and the right holders evolving? And which of these, will play or have a great influence into the industry?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is institutions are the ones that are most risk, of becoming irrelevant within their own industry. The reason why is because they do not own the relationship between themselves and the fans. The commercial leverage is not there. The streaming platforms, the right holders, they have the leverage. Investors, they have capital, so they will always have sort of their own differentiator. But within that triangle I mentioned, the next decade, I think, is where you see the power shift between the institutions and the right holders, especially with the hyperscalers, the streaming platforms, the Apples, the Netflixes, the designs, the Amazons. They would have even more entrenched power within the industry, unless unless the institutions do the right thing, which is integrate the ability to build these platforms themselves. I think the Premier League is doing something different. I think they're trying to test this out. I think in one of the East Asian countries, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Singapore, maybe Malaysia, there's an announcement about this. I'm not sure which country, where they're basically building a direct to consumer model, a DTC model for the broadcasting rights. And I think obviously Ligue 1, the French league is doing this also. But for investors, I think you're going to see more investors want to have more operational impacts in clubs. You've seen that with Red Capital, with your investment in AC Milan. You've seen that with Liverpool. I think you're going to see that take place over time, and then maybe over time we're going to see, the German football become even more valuable. Only reason is because they've had the ability to create like a structure whereby they're protected from having outside investments, at the same time keeping the relationship with the fans. Sorry, keeping the power within the fan base. I think because of that, they will have, let's call it, the ability to do things that are aligned with the fans, but at the same time continue to bring in the right sort of like revenues due to their hyper personalized relationship with the fan base. Like the Bundesliga have had a strategy of sending their broadcast rights to individual content creators. So you've had Mark Goldbridge and his channel. He's had the streaming rights for the Bundesliga. Overlap is a football channel created by Gary Neville, the ex-Manchester United footballer. He also has streaming rights for Bundesliga. So that's something that's innovative that they're doing, that I think is going to give them the ability to do things according to what they think makes sense for their strategy, but also for the club itself, meaning the fans.
Correct. Now we'll move on to the next segment of the podcast. That's the rapid fire round. I'll ask you a few questions and you'll have to be quick in answering. It can be one word or one sentence max.
Okay.
Who is your favorite player of all time?
Zidane.
One football club you think is the best run business in the world right now?
Real Madrid.
Okay. Private equity investing in football, long-term opportunity or long-term risk?
Long-term opportunity.
Okay. If you could advise any football club for a year, which one would you pick?
I would say Ajax. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. One football stadium every sports professional should experience at least once in lifetime.
Yeah, the Santiago Bernabéu, the Bernabéu, Real Madrid. Yeah.
Okay. Messi or Ronaldo, and you only get one sentence to explain why.
I would say Ronaldo, only because I'm not saying Messi is not hardworking, only because I see more of myself in Ronaldo. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, your go-to match day snack or food?
I mean, I think, I'm a simple person. I would say just a cookie, and a sandwich. Yeah.
Okay. One football documentary or book every sports professional should watch or read.
I would say, yeah, Moneyball.
Okay.
Moneyball.
That's interesting. And you were very quick. I liked it.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll move on to the next segment. You will have to answer one question into 30 seconds. What is the role of AI into the triangle right now? What we are discussing, the institutions, investors, and the right holders. What is the role of AI into that?
So obviously, AI is not a tool that just sits in that triangle. It's a tool that is going to reshape the triangle completely. So it's going to reshape the leverage that each party in that triangle has. But I think what you're going to see is that it's going to increase the pie for all sides. So operational efficiencies, it's going to help with decision making for the club. It's going to help with valuation multipliers for the investors. It's going to help with giving the right holders the ability to have even more personalized distribution for content, for for the rights that they want to sort of like create value for the fan base, for the demographic that they're serving. So I think AI fundamentally is going to be used as a multiplier for change, operational efficiency, and then it's going to have sports industry go through like exponential value sort of creation that we haven't seen in a long time. Yeah.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for sharing wonderful insights. And it was a really interesting podcast today.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, everyone, let's stay connected and please share this episode with everyone who loves sports and technology. We will meet in the next episode next week. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring.